We should have two microphones, one for the streaming and one for the...
I don't know.
It's two. One us or just
You can use any of them.
Yeah.
They're all connected.
We just have to, yeah, that's right. Michael?
Yeah?
For the presentations, this is working.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. It's working? Yeah. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome you here at the ESRF. I am Francesco Sette, the Director General of this place, and I'm honored to see you here, but also the colleagues that are following us from other places in streaming. So hello to everybody. We are here to start getting our acts together on this Attract initiative. Looks like Attract is going to be funded, so this is a fantastic opportunity on a quite visionary program, in the sense that this is an exercise that started a few years ago. Some of us were there right at the beginning of something that sounded very complicated and very perhaps difficult to put in place according to all the regulations, structures, procedures that we have around Europe and beyond. And nevertheless, we succeeded. We succeeded to put together this visionary concept of trying to use science as a driver for innovation. We have been seeing many situations in which this was the case, and science has contributed and continues to contribute to many, many important development in our society, creating opportunities for industry, creating jobs. But never so far an initiative really wanted to underline the importance that science has for industrial opportunities, but also the other way around. How important is an innovative industry in order to enable good science and new discoveries. It's on that basis that many institutes, among them in particular those intergovernmental institutions that are grouped together in Euroforum, but not only those, many others, got together trying to streamline a program that could show that this can work, and can work because we have in Europe the possibility of putting all the elements together. So this is, for me, not just an opportunity to get a proposal funded by the European Commission. It's much more than that. It's a challenge that we are taking up, and we should demonstrate that it works. So, because Attract is just the beginning of perhaps a new way of developing our society in which the science, the education of the young generations, the use of science in facing major challenges that we have around us, creating jobs, having a better society at the end of the day. So this is what I think really is behind Attract and behind all those that supported Attract so far. So we have a real challenge in front of us. This information meeting is therefore very, very important, because it's the first time in which we now start to think about how we are going to proceed, how we're going to identify the project to be supported, and therefore is very, very important. So I count about 60 people, plus perhaps as much, following us from elsewhere. So we are 120. I hope that these numbers will become much, much bigger in the years to come. So thank you, and I wish you all a lot of success with this initiative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you as well. A warm welcome from my side. I'm Michael Krisch. I'm head of the Instrumentation Services and Development Division here at ESREF, and I have the honor to be a member of the project consortium board, which you will understand what it is later on. So I will somehow guide you through the afternoon. As you've seen from the program, unfortunately Sergio Bertolucci from University of Bologna could not join us. He's busy with a DOR review in the US. But Pablo Tello, kindly from CERN, kindly stepped in. You will learn very soon that CERN is actually the coordinator of the Attract Phase 1 project. We'll learn a lot about that. So I actually will guide you through the afternoon. It will be a doubleheader between Pablo and myself. And in order to put everybody up to speed and up to tone what Attract is all about, is we start with a very global view of how we envisage Attract to set the scene. I will then take over to explain you a little bit the structure and the governance of the Attract Phase 1 project, and then we will focus down essentially on explaining you what is the submission process for the open calls, which are really at the core of this Attract Phase 1, or another way of saying it is how to write a good proposal to the Attract consortium, which then hopefully will be funded. So with no further delay, I hand over to Pablo to give you the first visionary talk about Attract, and I invite you to listen and keep your questions to the end of the individual presentations, keeping in mind that we will have a general question and answer session following the third talk, and as well people who are online from home, from their institutes, can ask questions by through the email address we indicated in our email. So we encourage as well the people who are not here with us today to send emails to that email address, and we try to catch up with you during the meeting, during the question and answer session, to answer your questions. And with that, I leave the floor to Pablo. Thank you. Okay, you put it down.
Hello, it's. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot, Francesco. Thanks a lot, Michael. It's always a pleasure to come to ESRF, and especially in this moment when we are ramping up the Attract initiative that, as Francesco mentioned, has been selected for being funded by the European Commission. We are at the moment ramping up the grant agreement negotiations, and my first intention is to substitute Sergio Bertolucci and try to give you a vision and of the overall a picture of Attract. So this first cartoon symbolizes what Francesco also has summarized excellently. We start from science and the mission that science, especially fundamental science, is pursuing. For pursuing this mission, there is a need to create cutting-edge instrumentation. In many occasions, several years ahead of what mainstream industry is capable of producing or is busy with, because for fulfilling the mission of fundamental science, you need orders of magnitude in terms of achieving those limits that we set ourselves and our communities as a goal. And the creation and the development of this instrumentation can lead in many occasions to advances that translate into the different technologies that we see in our society now, or we will see in the years to come. So this cartoon illustrates in a nutshell what the philosophy behind the ATTRACT initiative is: science driving present and future innovation, not in an incremental way, but in a breakthrough way. This is an overview of the different aspects I will touch during this presentation. The political context of ATTRACT, how we intend to build a new innovation ecosystem in Europe, the philosophy behind the initiative, how we respond to the political challenges that Europe is putting in front of us, and especially to research infrastructures and the communities associated to them. The reason why these organizations that you saw in the first cartoon are the drivers of this initiative. So why research infrastructures together with industry and business and innovation specialists? The paradigm that is behind of ATTRACT, so the rationale of the initiative. What is the technology focus and the business angle? A preoccupation of creating opportunities also for young talent in Europe. So we create an environment where young entrepreneurs don't need to go to Silicon Valley to assume risks and start their and ramping up the ideas there, but if possible, little by little, creating an ecosystem for them here in Europe. And some nuggets, glimpses of the really long-term vision, which we hope that will materialize beyond 2021, meaning in the next framework program, FP9. So, to start with, European research infrastructures, they have succeeded in these many years of existence to establish the paradigm and the ecosystem of open science. Information is circulating freely among the communities. There is mutual trust, and the most important thing, that this ecosystem over the years have been capable of balancing collaboration and competition. Unfortunately, this balance of collaboration and competition and open science, as of today, doesn't have a counterpart in Europe, meaning an ecosystem of innovation, which at the same time balances collaboration and competition, for many different reasons that it will be long to get into at this moment, but anyone that has experience with industrial actors can figure it out. So the lack of this counterpart ecosystem in innovation as counterpart from open science, is causing, among many other reasons, a lack of competitiveness in Europe. And the Commission is very aware of that. As many of you know, Commissioner Moeda's motto for his mandate is "From open science to open innovation, open to the world." So this is the political context in which ATTRACT has been generated. We see also, if we narrow down to the world of research infrastructures and the research communities associated to them, that the European Commission is emphasizing the role that research infrastructures should play as innovation engines, not only as generators of knowledge, but also as facilitators of innovation. And they represent an enormous potential in Europe. There are an increasing amount of number of research infrastructures, but so the ecosystem is there, but is it used optimally? We are not yet the United States of Europe, so sometimes we are reinventing the wheel in many different places and many different times. So could we create an ecosystem of taking advantage of the experience of open science in research infrastructures and advance one more step towards innovation. So this is the aim of Attract: create an ecosystem of opportunities for serving, first of all, the research infrastructures and their communities and their mission. So the root is in fundamental science and the challenges that fundamental science entail, especially in building instrumentation. But at the same time, keeping an eye on how this mission and endeavor of research infrastructures and this instrumentation could extract industrial value that, at the end of the day, improves the lives of the citizens, especially in Europe. And at the same time, if this value, in many ways, could be a stimulus for young professionals and especially young entrepreneurs. In other words, the philosophy of Attract is that we believe that pursuing the fundamental science limit generates breakthrough technologies, and these technologies can systematically generate innovation that could be translated over time towards society, responding to the so-called societal challenges. In some cases, will be a short time to translate it. In some other cases, it will be a longer time. And in the overall, this translation will materialize in an increase of societal wealth for Europe and its citizens. There are different responses towards what is coming or what we as our society will face in the coming years. You can read it in the newspapers every day: immigration, climate change, etc. And you have different types of innovation in order to face and search for solution to these societal challenges. You can innovate incrementally, but this will generate only an adaptive response to these societal challenges. You can generate a substantial innovation that somehow is a reactive response to these societal challenges. But you can generate breakthrough innovation, and this is a proactive response to the societal challenges. So you try to find solution before the stone is hitting you. This is the quadrant where we want to place Attract, for the reason that, as I mentioned before, research infrastructures are a luxury in terms of generating instrumentation that could provide solutions far away from incrementalism. Why different types of partners in the ramping up of the Attract initiative with this project? Because experience has demonstrated that the communities capable of creating value, the value generators, the scientific communities mainly, are not necessarily the best ones in order to extract this value and capture it towards applications that can translate in the products or technologies that we as citizens use every day or can use in the future. Therefore, we need to have a first consortium that represents the different actors on the value chain. The value generators, represented here by the different research infrastructures involved in the Attract Phase 1 project. The value captors, represented by the European Industrial Research Management Association, which is the door towards many or the majority of the industry in Europe, is the federation federated association of the industry in Europe, and the value extractors represented by the business schools and innovation specialists, putting emphasis on design thinking. Design thinking puts the individual and the problems before the technology. First you identify the individual and the problem, and afterwards, through a backwards process, you generate the solution for these problems. So in that sense, it's a double feedback loop between science and societal problems. And of course, we need an actor that is capable to invest in this initiative, to absorb the risk that many of these technological ideas will have in the very beginning. And for that, we are very grateful to the European Commission and the open dialogue that we are having with them, not only for this project, but for the future of the initiative, since they see the value of public funding as a risk absorption mechanism, complemented in the future with different types of funding, especially from the private sector. So the success of Attract is thank you to these different actors that along this project they will need to stimulate the different communities and work together to have a very proof of concept that an ecosystem in Europe of this kind is possible. Having a proactive response to the societal challenges puts Attract in the upper right quadrant of what is called the Pasteur quadrant. So enabling basic research as a generator of user-inspired solutions. This is something that is well known and that has been the driver of many of the discoveries in fundamental science that later on has generated extensive benefits to our society. What is the paradigm? What is the motor behind the philosophy of Attract? As I briefly mentioned before, the challenge is to create an ecosystem that we call is driven by co-innovation. Co-innovation is a point in which you have managed to balance collaboration and competition, which, as I mentioned before, for the world of research infrastructures is something that has been achieved a long time ago. Scientists share and at the same time compete for results, but this is not happening yet in the innovation arena. It's much more closed. So in order to have a balance between between competition and collaboration, the first thing to be created is an ecosystem of trust, an ecosystem in which every actor, being it scientific or industrial, sees more benefit to belong to this ecosystem than to stay outside. And I will talk a little bit more about how this vision could materialize in the future. But this is the paradigm that we put as the measure of success in the ramping up of the Attract initiative. If we manage to create this ecosystem during this project and a potential second phase of this project, then we will be fully prepared to discuss with the European Commission that this scheme has been successful, that we have been able to measure success, and that innovation could be done in a different way in Europe as it has been done until the moment. Of course, when we talk about instrumentation and breakthrough instrumentation and creating an ecosystem, the scientific fields are extremely broad. And in order for the initiative to be focused, we need to pick up a scientific and technological field that is broad, but at the same time is not extremely huge. That we have a clear focus. And the clear focus is detection and imaging technologies. When we talk about detection and imaging technologies, we talk about the whole value chain, from the sensors that you use towards the data acquisition system and the computing that you need in order to extract information about this data. So this is the full value chain that we refer to in Attract when we talk about detection and imaging technologies. So it is broad, but it's not infinite. And it allows the initiative to start with a focus that is clearly defined. And why this focus on detection and imaging technologies? Well, this is the backbone of European research infrastructures and the communities. Is the specialty. There's a lot of know-how accumulated during the years of existence of European research infrastructures in Europe, is the driver for pursuing the goals of fundamental science, but at the same time, they constitute the core of industrial development in Europe. It's very difficult to think about an industrial sector today or in the future that will not make use of detection and imaging technologies in any shape or form for any product in the future. A very good example is the Internet of Things. A very good example is the emergence of the autonomous cars, in which you need an enormous amount of detection and imaging technologies and computing power, for example, to sense, to establish a car-to-car communication, car-to-pedestrian communication, car-to-road communication. We are more and more embedded into the Internet of Things. There are plenty of other applications. I'm sure you can name much better than I do many of them, from DNA sequencing, etc. So it's very difficult, really, if you make an extrapolation of imagination, something, a product that we can use or that our societies or cities or citizens will benefit from that is not connected in one way or another to detection and imaging technologies. And finally, detection and imaging technologies allow for the emergence of fast innovators, being those in the ICT arena in any shape or form. Think about, for example, fields like photonics, fields like algorithms for computing. There is an increased amount of fast innovators in Europe, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises that are really thinking ahead. And they are the new incumbents that, again, can collaborate and can compete with the big ones. So these are the main three factors behind the choice of detection and imaging technologies as a framework for Attract. As I said before, detection and imaging technologies translate in all fields in which we are directly in contact with, from, for example, our transport system and transport networks, from hospitals and medicines towards smart cities. The amount of sensors that we'll have in the coming future is not a question of decades. Really, in the coming future, will generate an enormous amount of data, and if we want to extract information about the data, we also need computing power. Therefore, the full value chain of detection and imaging. I mentioned also that we need organizations that are capable to extract the value of the technologies generated within Attract in different vectors. One is, of course, the industrial vector, and I have talked about it. But the second important vector is how the initiative works itself, how it's analyzed by business specialists using business parameters. And for that, we need the collaboration of business schools that will analyze, will have the opportunity to analyze in situ how the initiative is developing and extract conclusions that can serve to the strategic management of companies and business communities. And the third vector is the vector of the young entrepreneurs. A lot of young entrepreneurs in Europe, so-called millennials, for example, they're thinking in applications in a completely different way that we are. And we want Attract to be a platform of inspiration for them, putting concrete actions in the project that Michael will talk about. So these are the three vectors capable of capturing the value that will generate out of the scientific communities linked to research infrastructures. We have, within the consortium, experimental facilities in which Attract has been piloted, among them Idea Square at CERN, that I will be glad to invite you there and take a look. Auto Design Factory, Sade Business School, they have Creapolis, which is seed places of young entrepreneurs, which the main goal is not the creation or developing of technology. The main goal is to identify the problems that we as individuals have. For example, how to allow elderly people to live in a much more autonomous way at home, how to avoid too much waste of food. And inspired by the technologies generated within Attract, they come up with solutions that us, the community of scientists, were never able to imagine. I can put you an example of Idea Square at CERN, since this is the initiative where I'm involved. We developed a fast computer chip that was used for detection of the track of particles, but this chip was tested by the students and ended up being part of device and an equipment to teach autistic children how to socialize. If you come to CERN or offline, I can give you more details, but this is something that is an application with direct contact towards solving a problem of education in society that would never ever have been thought by our scientific community. Nevertheless, once they saw this development, they were so involved in the project that they were fully in. So this is the kind of emergent collaboration that the Attract initiative also would like to not only see, but also measure. Let me, just to finish this first presentation, give you what could be our long-term vision, and I'm talking about 2021 and beyond. We want Attract to be a pool of opportunities. If you want to define it in a nutshell, it will be that Attract makes possible the best fishing rod for all the actors in the ecosystem within Attract, and then each one can choose what to fish and how. This also symbolizes not only a silly example or a catchy phrase, it symbolizes, first of all, the openness of sharing technologies and development while they are in the perimeter of attract and using public funding, and the possibility to take these developments and further tweak them at home and then apply it to a particular case in which you could have the advantage of protecting it, but not when they are in the ecosystem of sharing. So therefore, it's also a symbol of collaboration and competition as well. For that, dreaming a little bit, it would be possible in the future to create, we call it for the moment the Attract iStore, in which technologies from Attract projects funded by public money come in an open science environment where everybody benefits from them, and the first ones are the research infrastructures, because these projects, the origin of these projects are the enabling of the fundamental vision and mission of research infrastructures, but they can go to an open innovation environment if some of the private actors could actually improve further this development for their own purpose. And dreaming even a little bit more, we can dream about creating in the time of the next framework program sort of public repository for Attract-funded technologies, where we have loose intellectual property governing regulation, like in an open source regime. We are not crazy, absolutely. Open source is existing and it works well, and you have now technologies that are starting that will enable even a much more great implementation of this. I'm sure that you all have heard about blockchain, for example, that is nowadays mainly used for trading of bitcoins, but the technology of blockchain is not only limited to that. It can be used in many different ways, and we are exploring all these concepts. So this repository could be available to the Attract community, but open to others too, with the rule that whoever takes something must give something back. This is actually a principle that works well in many open source platforms nowadays. And an interesting phenomena, if you read about how the open source platforms work, is that the free riders are really detected by the user community. So the user community is their own regulation. It is incredible, for example, if you read about Linux, how a free rider is detected in a question of hours. And then nobody wants to collaborate with this organization or person again. And this repository, of course, will give the possibility to further develop in-house technologies for certain application. So as I mentioned, open source platforms have demonstrated to be generators of new business opportunities. And it will perfectly align with the European Commission policies about achieving more and more openness, especially when you are using public funding for doing research or innovation. And the inherent advantage that the developments are further improved by the user community. This could be some elements that we will need to explore in the ramping up of Attract. You will have the opportunity to raise your voice. We are not going to discuss them in private. We are going to invite all the stakeholders, individuals interested in Attract to bring ideas. And we would like at the end of the Track Phase 1 project to present a model to the European Commission that is not only just words, but that is fundamented in evidence, coming from a tract and coming from the study of different communities using these developments. Here at ESRF, you have a tremendous opportunity in the ATTRACT community. It's a facility that is not only doing fundamental science, but is closely linked to industry. One only needs to go to your fantastic website and pick up whatever example. I put here some of them, but I could have chosen others, of cases that they really impress me. For example, the study of materials through your technology that improve energy storage, one of the main preoccupations in the future. We are depending more and more on energy sources, and we need better and more efficient energy sources, portable or not. Electronics, everybody in the electronics industry is looking at silicon germanium as the next technology that will overcome or allow at least Moore's law to progress in speed. Density of data storage, the amount of sensors and information that these sensors are going to generate in the future will be humongous, and for that we will need a place to store it for later analysis or in real-time analysis. Or, for example, all the world of personalized medicine is incredible how you guys are connected through projects like antibody tracking, etc. So from the ESRF part, but you know much more than I do, of course, I think it's an excellent opportunity for your contributions. As a conclusion, emphasize once more that ATTRACT is an initiative that is ramping up with this first project, that our goal is to demonstrate that pursuing the fundamental science limits generates value, and this value is possible to be captured beyond pure serendipity, but we can systematize serendipity. Our mission and goal and hope is to create an ecosystem of trust, not only in open science, this is already done, but in open innovation, which is a much more trickier space, and balance, collaboration and competition, what we call co-innovation. In that sense, and in our discussions and dialogue with the European Commission and Commissioner Moedas, we are fully aligned with the goal, the political goal of the Commission with respect to the European Innovation Union, from open science to open innovation. And last but not least, it means to be an initiative not only for the experienced research communities, but also give an opportunity to young innovators in Europe. So thank you very much. I hope I have managed to give you an overview of what is the vision and the philosophy of ATTRACT. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to try to answer them now or when Michael signs.
Thank you, Pablo. Are there any questions to the scope of the project, keeping in mind that I will go a little bit more in detail in how the project itself is structured, the ATTRACT Phase 1 project, but if there are more general questions at that stage, please feel free. Pablo, you're a victim of your success. You have been crystal clear.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Francesco, sorry, I didn't.
Thank you for a really beautiful talk. A general question. I find extremely interesting and innovative the fact that scientists and industry are trying to build up this collaboration, but they are now together with business school, with incubators of think tanks and real, let's say, bringing this more societal view to the problem, and to what you have said, which I share 100%, that it's very important sometimes to look at what is the problem. And in science and research, to have a good problem is probably the most difficult part of the whole research exercise. So once you have a good problem, then it's much easier to find very innovative solutions. So the question is the role of this third partner is something that how do you see it embedded in the attract process? It will be more in the sort of follow-up of the activities, or will be considered as an important element in the proposals that will have to be done?
This is a very good question, Francesco. I think Michael will clarify also more, but the role of ESADE and Aalto University are not decorative in the project. Actually, there are concrete actions that they will undertake. Aalto and ESADE will organize a pilot for 100 students selected from all over Europe. And these 100 students will be from 3 different branches, will be engineers, master level students, engineers, business school students, and product design students or industrial design students. And they will be divided in interdisciplinary teams of 5 to 7 students, and they will be put in contact with different projects that will be funded by Attract, not to generate technologies, obviously, but to get inspired from the technologies that these projects are generating and focus on a challenge. And this challenge will be of societal nature. And we are in contact with many NGOs like the Red Cross, etc. They really know what are the problems that our society faces. And these students, the mission of these pilots is for the students to generate prototypes for these solutions. We don't want PowerPoint slides, we want prototypes. And for that, I mentioned physical spaces that we already within the consortium count on, and these activities will be realized there. And of course, there will be an analysis done especially by ESADE and Aalto on what are the challenges that the young entrepreneurs are facing when developing this solution. This will serve to maybe create a sort of curriculum that could be at the disposal of universities, etc., to organize and this activity, they have a ripple effect.
Okay, I think we can go ahead. We swap the microphone. Pablo. All right. Okay, so just I can close that one.
Yes. And down there.
That guy?
This one.
Okay. All right, so Pablo said very nicely the general scene of the spirit, the scope, the ambition of the Attract initiative, which you understood right now is much more than the just funded Attract Phase 1, which is a concrete first step in this initiative, which has really a long-term ambition. And I wanted to just complement what Pablo said and go in depth into a few aspects of the Attract Phase 1 project, which is really based on the proposal which has been submitted and evaluated by the Commission. Again, just a reminder, it's really a proposal for a dedicated interdisciplinary program to co-develop with research infrastructures and industry breakthrough sensor and imaging technologies. So this is really at the core of that mission. And again, to remind you, the purpose is to address demanding challenges in both science and societal needs. I think this has been very well explained by Pablo, and it really involves and thrives to involve a vast portfolio of R&D communities, from the classical disciplines such as biology, physics, astronomy, to space exploration, nuclear engineering, medical sensing, and the related computing and ICT challenges which go with that. And Pablo very nicely illustrated that with the ever-increasing detector capabilities, we will have a bottleneck already now to get the data out of the detector onto our storage media. So it's a real a challenge which will not be solved easily. So we need really disruptive technologies to tackle that. Again, this has been showed by Pablo, just to underline the three axes. We have the business and innovation partners. We have the industry partner represented by IMA. We are clearly in Phase 1 very grateful to the European Commission. This is the sole public funder of this project. And we have the research infrastructures, which Pablo already introduced, and these is a subset of the so-called IRO Forum partners. The IRO Forum partners is an entity. It's not a legal entity, but it's an agglomeration of research infrastructures with a clear international governance model. And of course, you find ESREF, ILL, and EMBL. So these are the three representatives on the EPN campus here in Grenoble. CERN, the European Southern Observatory, and the European XFEL. So these are the research infrastructure beneficiaries, to talk in the European Commission language, of this Phase 1 Attract project. And so this is, having said, this has been a proposal to the Horizon 2020 frame program. It has the classical structure of a European project. So more specifically, there is a legal framework through the grant agreement between the European Commission and the project consortium, the so-called Attract partners, which I presented on the previous slide. But a little bit in contrast to a standard European project, this money doesn't go into, it was not distributed inside and amongst the partners of this project. We act actually as a sort of a distributor of funds, and more specifically, the project consortium was in charge of launching and managing the open calls. And that's, I think, is very important to keep in mind. So we'll manage the process of the open call from the launch to the review and through granting proposals, evaluating them, and extracting a maximum of valuable information out of how well it went and why it went well. So this is really important to underline, that the project consortium within the Phase 1 launches these open calls, and you will hear in much more detail by Pablo what are the criteria, what are the procedures. Important to underline here is that we launch the open calls, but we not manage the evaluation of the calls itself. This is very important. This is done by an independent committee, which is the Research Development and Industrial Committee, which is completely independent from the project consortium. So there's not a single member in that thing, which is a part or associated to one of these research infrastructures. And then, once following the evaluation of the projects, these projects are awarded. We have funds, we believe, for up to 180 projects. They receive a modest sum of seed funding. It's clear that 100 kilo euro on an absolute scale, if we talk about the projects of zillions, is very small money, but it's meant to be a seed fund to give you time to push forward a project which you had in mind, which has a large risk factor, a step further towards the evaluation whether it's feasible, worth pursuing, or not so worth pursuing. So it's really seed funding, keeping in mind that in Attract Phase 1, we will hopefully have substantial funding for the most promising projects. Phase 2, sorry, thank you. So we are currently negotiating a budget envelope of 20 million. It's a very short project, and again, it's clear that within 2 years we'll not bring a crazy idea to market. That's clearly not the idea. It's to identify the potentially strongest projects, to push them slightly forward into the feasibility phase, and then followed in Phase 2 with substantial funding. So seed funding, again, in Phase 1 for 100 kilo euro, this is a lump sum, on topics related to detection and imaging technologies. The keywords here are sensors, front and back end electronics, data acquisition systems, and software and integration. You will hear about how to apply for these open calls, and you will see it's a fairly light procedure, and ultimately it boils down to a proposal which you have to submit, which is 4 pages long. So the administrative effort is reasonably modest. Pablo will go into the details. Just to remind me right away, you have to be a legal entity within the European Union and the Horizon 2020 associated countries, and it should have at least another partner amongst yourselves. But Pablo will go more into the details of the criteria and the eligibility criteria of the individual proposals. So this gives you a flavor already of the governance. As I said, this is a classical framework of a Horizon 2020 proposal, where the interaction with the Commission is managed by the Project Administrative Office, which will be located at CERN, because CERN is the coordinator of the project. As I mentioned before, we have an independent committee which evaluates the proposals and makes recommendation to the Project Consortium Board for the approval of the successful proposals. The Project Consortium Board has a representative from each partner of the Attract Phase 1 project. So there's one representative from CERN, one from EASREF, and so on and so forth. And we have a project advisory committee. If you like, this is a sort of a collection of wise, very experienced people, again, which are not part of the Attract consortium, who look into how Attract goes in the Phase 1 and advises the PCB specifically on their vision, how to evolve Attract from Phase 1 into Phase 2 into a cyclic process where ultimately the aim is to reduce the public funding and increase the private funding investors via business angels and so on and so forth. So this is an advisory committee with people in there which have experience in business and big research infrastructure work to help the Attract partners in building up the future. The project itself is, again, as I mentioned before, a classical European project. It has split up in work packages. Work package 1 traditionally is the project management, and it is operated and run by CERN. We have an important work package, the work package 7, which is the Attract Phase 1 project evaluation. As Pablo explained, we thrive really into a long-term sustainability of the Attract initiative. And this work package 7 will carefully evaluate on established criteria how successful Phase 1 is running, where things need to be improved, where directions need to be adapted, and so on and so forth. We have 2 work packages, namely work package 2 and work package 3. I will go through them in a little bit more detail. One is the industrial liaison, so this obviously provides the links to industry, and work package 3, which provides the liaison with the European and national research infrastructures, academia, and RTOs. So the goal of these two work packages is to promote participation in the Attract Phase 1 open call for a specific target audience, for work package 2 industrial, and for work package 3 the research infrastructures, academic research groups, and RTOs. So this is really, if you like, this event is one of the first actions before the project really starts to get everybody on board in as many different disciplines across Europe in a homogeneous way. Then work package 4 is the business innovation, knowledge and technology transfer bridge, and that was very nicely again explained by Pablo. It's not all about technology, it's as well to get young innovators and entrepreneurs on board, and specifically with the help of Alto and Desade, which are well-established business schools where challenge-based innovation is taught with a great success. And Pablo gave only one of many, many very beautiful examples of how a challenge in society is converted into a solution through existing technologies. And this will be encouraged through this entrepreneur pilot where design thinking methodologies will be used to imagine and develop new societally relevant products or service concepts. And on a selection of the 180 projects which will be funded in Attract Phase 1. So we'll pick out maybe 10 or 20 pilots on suitable projects which shall be run through this pilot. And as a second angle of this work package, the business schools will provide scientists within these 180 Attract Phase 1 funded projects with a basic knowledge or better understanding about how to carry the products to market through some sort of lessons to be learned to become an entrepreneur. Okay, work package 5, this is again a very important one. This is the scientific and technical monitoring, while the award of the 100 kilo euros is entirely within the scope of the independent committee. The monitoring of the progress on both scientific and technological level will be done within this work package, and this will be, of course, then fed back to the project coordination board via the project administrative office, so that we have a close monitoring on the progress of the individual open call funded projects, and eventually adapt corrective measures to help every project to be a success. And then, of course, this is the classical, but again, in this context, very important work package on communication, dissemination, and outreach. Of course, primarily to promote the results of the Attract Phase 1 project, but as well to organize investment pitching training for interested open call consortia members. So again, prepare the step from research infrastructures into innovation. And the project evaluation, I alluded to that already before, because this is really very critical in order to prepare the ground for the Attract Phase 2, which is really a scaling up of this Attract Phase 1, which is really to be considered as a pilot of the concept. Where do we stand in terms of the timeline? This is accomplished. We got notified by the EC that the proposal was successful in September 2017. We are today at this information meeting at the ESREF. There is another information meeting organized at CERN at the end of October. As Pablo underlined, we are currently in the negotiation phase. That means we don't know yet precisely when we really start the project. Current ideas are that this will be around late spring 2018. As I said, we run about for 2 years, so it's a short period. The key event in that time scale is the final assessment conference, which will be held at Brussels. And Pablo will explain in more detail what this final assessment conference is about. It's a very important conference because this will be basically the melting pot and the meeting point to present these 180 projects. And we hope that between now and 2020, we have demonstrated with your help, with the help of all the partners involved, with the community, that this concept works. This novel idea of bringing results from research infrastructures, from academic research, closer to the margin, faster than through traditional methods, that we are in the condition to launch Attract Phase 2, and we very much hope that this could be done as early as January 2021, and there indeed we thrive to have substantial funding for the best seed-funded projects in the Attract Phase 2. And then, hopefully, looking beyond, we hope to launch what we call the Attract program, which is essentially a cyclic repetition of seed funding and scale funding in a repetitive way in the long term. So we are basically just upfront here. The most promising seed-funded projects shall get scale funding in the Attract Phase 2, and the Attract program, the long-term vision we have, would be a cyclic repetition of this cycle here. To be more precise, for Attract Phase 2, if funded, we'll do a second cycle of seed funding plus scale funding for the most promising projects. In all that, and I think this is my last slide, the underlying concept which Pablo explained in his first vision talk is that Attract thrives to really accelerate the process from the idea over the demonstrator, the prototype, the product to market, which are identified by these different technology readiness levels, that we accelerate that through the Attract process. And again, if we talk about money, that means that we are currently in a value creation part of it, where there's a substantially high risk, and which is absorbed thanks to the funding through the public investor, which is the European Commission, to which we're very grateful. But the hope is that within our Attract phase and then in the Attract program, that A, this high risk goes down, and we go in a transition phase where the public funds ramp up and ramp down, and the private funds ramp up. So while we go into the Phase 2 and into the Attract project, that we have attracted in the meantime by building trust with private investors as well, that we are less dependent from public funds. But that's a vision which is very ambitious. We are all well aware of that, but we believe that we can make it if we get things right in the Attract Phase 1 and 2. And I think with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take any questions right now or later. Up to you.